You ever seen a librarian flip a kill switch while still holding a teacup? That was the last thing the rookie guard remembered before the blackout. The memory was fuzzy, but he swore it wasn't the tea that scared him. It was the calm way she blinked as the vault doors slammed shut, sealing in 10 armed men and half the government's secrets like she was shelving a romance novel. That morning had started like any other in the subterranean archives beneath Citadel 6. A polished transport shuttle descended into the stone-lined shaft, its sides stamped with the blue crest of the corporate authority. 5 guards stepped out first, clad in armor, sunglasses indoors, the whole caricature of modern enforcement. Behind them came a stiff man in a suit, muttering into a tablet about audit protocols. Lastly, there was Marcus, the junior tech with a lopsided badge and a habit of questioning orders in his head, never out loud. They were there to verify compliance and structural integrity of the oldest sealed wing in the library. Translation: poke around where no one had dared to for 20 years. The librarian was waiting for them by the catalog terminal. Her name tag read Etta. Her sweater was a shade of oatmeal that made eyes slide off her. Her glasses were real glass, not smart lenses. Her shoes made soft, practical squeaks against the marble. She smiled the way one might smile at an overzealous child trying to assemble a rifle backwards. "Welcome to the National Vault Library. Please sign in," she said, offering an old-style clipboard. The head guard snorted and ignored it. "We'll be needing unrestricted access to all archive sectors, including Vault Chamber 9. She paused just a second too long. Not enough to notice, unless you were Marcus, who had an eye for delays. Then she smiled again. "Of course. I'll unlock the secondary access corridors." They followed her past columns of data shelves and humming archive vaults. The guards looked around with vague disdain, like tourists at a history museum. "This place smells like my grandfather's basement," one of them muttered. Another chuckled and gestured toward Etta's wrist, where a black geometric tattoo poked just above her cuff. "Hey librarian, what's that supposed to be? A barcode for overdue books?" Laughter. Etta glanced down at her wrist as if she'd forgotten it was there. Then she looked up, expression unchanged, and said, "It's a seal. You'd know what that meant if they hadn't burned the old registry." The joke died on their lips. The head guard cleared his throat. "Stand down, Carton. Let's just get on with this." But Carton wasn't done. He pulled out a scanner and grinned. "Let's see if it still scans. Bet it brings up a library find from the Stone Age." He reached out, and faster than anyone could react, Etta caught the scanner midair. It was like watching an elderly cat snatch a bird from flight, unnatural in its precision. She gently powered it off and handed it back, her eyes locked on Carton's. "Some doors shouldn't be opened," she said softly. The moment passed. The tension diffused into scoffs. "Librarians," Carton muttered as he walked away. But Marcus didn't scoff. He stared at her hand as she tucked the sleeve back down, noting the way her fingers trembled, barely. He made a mental note and followed the others, but something felt off. The air was too still. The lights hummed too evenly. It felt less like a library and more like a place holding its breath. By late afternoon, the team had accessed the outer zones and were preparing to enter Vault Chamber 9. Etta stayed at her desk, pretending to catalog a stack of newly delivered scrolls. The head guard, whose name Marcus still hadn't caught, tapped his comms. "Confirming override for deep vault access. Level Gamma. Executing now." Somewhere deep in the structure, a faint tremor rolled through the stone like a sigh. Etta paused in her writing. Then, without looking up, she reached behind her terminal shelf and pressed her palm against a panel that hadn't existed 10 seconds ago. A soft beep acknowledged the touch. She slid open the drawer it revealed, removing a small device, a faded badge, and something that hadn't seen daylight in a long time, a glove marked with the same ink as her tattoo. In the server room nearby, a soft alarm chirped once. Red. Marcus, who had stayed behind under the pretense of checking thermal data flow, saw the alert. It was tagged Protocol Red, Manual Initiated, Operator 9A. His fingers froze above the keyboard. That wasn't supposed to be possible. 9A was a legacy tag. The operator attached to it was deceased, or decommissioned, or wiped. He couldn't remember which, but the records were sealed even to him. He turned to see Etta standing behind him, holding the device calmly. "You shouldn't be here," she said, not unkindly. He swallowed. "They triggered the override. You initiated Red." "That's impossible." She nodded. "Correct on both counts." Before he could speak again, the lights dimmed, and a synthetic voice echoed across the vault halls. "Containment mode active. Unauthorized breach detected. Lockdown initiated." Doors began to slam shut. One of the guards' radios crackled. "What the hell is going on? These corridors are shifting." Etta turned and walked away. Marcus stood there for a moment longer before following her, as if pulled forward by gravity. Back at the entrance to Chamber 9, the guards pounded on doors that were no longer responding to their commands. "Override the lock." "Now," someone screamed. The terminal blinked red. "Access denied. Operator 9A has sealed the vault." Inside, a dim overhead feed caught Etta's silhouette as she stepped into the main archival well, ancient files and unknown tech rising like monoliths around her. She paused, looked up, and spoke into the nearest mic. "You mocked the ink. That's fine. Symbols mean little without stories. But this story? This one ends with me." Then she closed the vault from the inside. The silence inside the vault wasn't just absence of sound, it was engineered, calibrated. Vault Chamber 9 didn't hum like the rest of the archive. It absorbed everything. No echo, no airflow, just a sense of depth, as if the walls were waiting for something to wake them. The guards who had forced their way in began to move slower, weapons raised but expressions tight with confusion. Lights overhead shifted tone, from sterile white to a muted amber glow, casting long shadows down the corridor. Their comms buzzed with static. Whatever signal linked them to the command uplink had gone dark the moment the vault sealed. Meanwhile, Marcus was chasing footsteps. Etta moved through the archives with unnatural precision, navigating crossways and corridors without hesitation, as though she'd memorized every shelf, every turn. She didn't run. She didn't even glance behind. Her movements were deliberate, her posture relaxed. Marcus was breathless when he finally caught up to her by a control terminal mounted beside a locked door labeled Sector Delta. She had already opened the panel and was typing on an ancient keyboard hardwired into the wall. He leaned against the frame and tried to steady his voice. "You're sealing them in. That wasn't a containment breach protocol. You triggered it manually." She didn't stop typing. "That's what Red is. A dead-hand measure. Activated by the original system architect. Designed in case of corruption or hostile takeover." His eyes narrowed. "So you are 9A. "I was," she replied softly. "Until they buried the entire program. Erased us, scattered our teams, rewrote the files. I became the Librarian because no one bothers the one cataloging the truth. But truth has a bad habit of resurfacing, doesn't it?" Marcus processed that in fragments. His logical brain tried to reconcile the gentle woman who'd spent a decade sorting paperbacks with the operator calmly sealing a tactical team inside a vault. "What's in Chamber 9? He finally asked. She looked at him then, her face unreadable. "The Concord files." He blinked. "Those are a myth." "No," she said. "They're a threat. A record of every cover-up, every engineered war, every erased rebellion. Not summaries. Not reports. Full transcripts. Live feeds. Orders signed in blood. The files were built to be our species' immune system. Truth so raw, so undeniable, it would be used only if the entire world system became infected." Marcus's throat felt dry. "And they came to destroy it." She paused, staring at the monitor. "Worse. They came to rewrite it. Replace it with fiction that paints them as saviors. Edit reality itself." On the lower levels, the guards were splitting up. Carton had taken 2 men and headed east, toward the AI server nodes, assuming he could bypass the lockouts. The rest had tried brute force on the mechanical exit, only to trigger a secondary lockdown that dropped a steel blast gate behind them. Every noise they made now seemed to echo strangely, even without sound. Somehow the walls pulsed back tension, like an animal watching from the dark. Etta keyed in a command string, and a nearby panel opened. Inside were physical copies of classified documents, hard printouts sealed in transparent film. Marcus stepped closer and stared at the headings: Project Eden Reset, Lunar Transfer Pact Redline, Domestic Erasure Protocols. These aren't just histories. These are weapons. Yes, she said. And truth is the sharpest one. Back below, Carton's path led him into a server hallway that didn't appear on any modern map. The terminals along the walls were analog relics, CRT screens flickering with text, status logs dating back 30 years. He tapped on one, and the screen lit up with a single line, "Welcome, traitor." He stepped back instinctively, aiming his rifle at nothing. His comms buzzed to life just long enough to catch the beginning of a whisper. "Hello, Carton. I remember you." He shouted to his team. "Do you hear that? Who's on channel?" No one responded. A moment later, the hallway shifted. Panels along the floor lit up in sequence, drawing his attention forward. Then the temperature dropped. The ventilation units above them weren't pushing air anymore. They were pulling it. A dry hiss filled the space. One of the guards collapsed, coughing. The other dropped his weapon and started panicking. "This isn't gas. They are pumping cold air, liquid ventilation. It's a nerve dampener." Carton shouted to retreat, but by then the hallway had sealed again, locking him in alone. Etta closed the live feed. "One down." Marcus looked disturbed. "You're hurting them." "I'm isolating them. I designed the vault with multiple containment paths. I'm not here to kill anyone, Marcus. I'm here to prevent fiction from replacing memory. But some doors can't stay half open. They either stay shut, or we let them in." He glanced around. "What's your plan?" She walked to a storage unit and pulled out an old secure capsule. It pulsed with a faint blue glow and bore the insignia of the Pre-Corporate Alliance. "This is the master key. It allows overwrite of the entire vault system, AI, data, and atmospheric control. I lock this inside the main chamber, shut it down, and scrub all external access. Then I upload the truth to every shadow node still out there." He hesitated. "Why tell me?" She handed him a card. "Because I can't make it back out. But you can. If this fails, someone has to remember." At the vault entrance, the remaining guards were trying to breach the lower stairwell, unaware that the floor below had already been reconfigured. Surveillance drones floated silently in the rafters, each recording from multiple angles. The broadcast began seconds later. The archive's internal speakers clicked on, playing fragments of voices, authentic, chilling. Orders to silence journalists. Funding trails for destabilizing regimes. Corporate officials laughing over staged relief missions. Panic set in. Shut it down. Find the speaker system. But it wasn't coming from speakers. It was coming from the walls. The stone itself. Etta had hardwired the truth into the structure. Marcus stood beside her as more feeds lit up. He watched as one by one, the guards' panic became visible. Some screamed. One fired at a camera. Another knelt down and began sobbing. The data was too raw. Too real. It broke through conditioning like sunlight through mold. Etta whispered, "They thought we were here to guard books. But we were always here to guard memory." Then she turned and descended into the final corridor, the one place even the blueprints avoided. As the doors closed behind her, Marcus stared at the card in his hand. On it was a single symbol. The same tattoo. The same seal. "Truth doesn't sleep," it said on the back. And neither should those who remember. The past had a way of echoing louder than commands shouted in the present. And in Vault Chamber 9, those echoes now screamed through every wire, panel, and breathing soul trapped inside. One of the guards smashed his rifle against a sealed door, sweat streaking down his temples. He kept yelling for extraction, for backup, for anyone listening, but he might as well have been calling into a tomb. Somewhere above, the voice of a man he never knew played on loop, cold and official. All dissenting operatives will be removed from history. Full erasure protocol authorized. The man in the audio had once been his commanding officer. That realization sank like poison. Etta moved through a passage only she remembered, because she had helped design it. The Concorde vault wasn't a place, it was a living record. Its walls bore fibery active circuits, capable of mimicking stone but hiding layers of quantum memory beneath. She walked without hesitation toward the heart of it, carrying the capsule with the override key. Behind her, Marcus lingered, caught between awe and horror. The stories he'd read about the collapse of the old Federation always painted neat lines. Good versus bad. Rebels versus order. But here, the lines blurred. She wasn't a rebel. She was the architect of the system they buried. He caught up to her just as she stopped before a massive circular door, its surface etched with an ancient seal, 3 interlocked rings surrounding a single eye. It was the seal on her wrist. She turned to him and said, "I never wanted this job. I wanted to build something people could trust. Instead, I built something they feared. And when it started working too well, when truth became more dangerous than lies, they shut it all down. They shut me down." Marcus asked, "Why not release this earlier? Why wait until now?" She smiled faintly. "Because exposure without collapse is chaos. But collapse without truth is tyranny. I waited for the cracks to show. And now they are everywhere." Inside the sealed archive control chamber, Carton had been reduced to silence. He sat slumped beneath a flickering console, his breathing shallow. The systems had locked him into a memory loop. Footage from one of the suppressed conflicts he'd served in now shone from the other side. His medals felt like lead weights on his chest. The truth wasn't just damning, it was humiliating. They'd trained him to believe he was protecting order. But he saw the orders now. He saw the footage of the things he'd justified. The final clip showed an intercepted feed of his own voice, laughing after a black site raid that had wiped out a resistance school. It ended with coordinates, buried in the Concorde files, matching the site of that very operation. His voice cracked. "She knows. She knew all along." Above, the guards who weren't incapacitated began turning on each other. Paranoia set in. Who knew what? Who was recorded where? What if their names were in the files? And what happened when those files went public? Every one of them had something they didn't want exposed. One tried shooting a camera. Another disabled a drone. But the truth wasn't in the devices, it was in the vault. In the very structure. And every attempt to suppress it only made the walls pulse brighter with defiance. Marcus watched Etta input the key into the central port. Lights rippled outward in concentric rings. He stepped back instinctively as a panel in the floor slid open, revealing a massive spiral of servers reaching down like a drainpipe of glowing memory. The air tasted charged, metallic, like standing in a thundercloud. She handed him a data crystal. "This is a backup. If I fail to trigger the final protocol, this goes to the remaining nodes. Use the passphrase on the card I gave you." He nodded, hesitating. "You're staying." "I am," she said. "If someone doesn't finish the overwrite manually, they could still intercept or rewrite the launch from outside. I have to be here when the system cycles." His voice shook. "Why does it always end in sacrifice?" She looked away, toward the spiral. "Because truth isn't a weapon until someone chooses to carry it." Far above, the static began to fade from the comms systems. One of the remaining guards caught a signal, distorted but clear enough. A voice was issuing a command: "Abort mission. Do not engage the Librarian. Extract and erase only the Concorde capsule." It was coming from the corporate uplink. That meant they were watching. Still trying to control the narrative. The guard turned to the others. "They are selling us out. They are leaving us here." Back in the control room, Etta initiated the core sequence. A timer appeared on the main display, 10 minutes until data cascade. Marcus could feel the hum beneath his boots. She spoke into the system, her voice steady, clear. "To the architects who silenced me, to the leaders who rewrote history, and to the officers who enforced fiction, I'm returning what you buried. If you wanted the world to forget, you should have burned every copy. Including me. The system began unlocking every sealed vault. Data poured from nodes into the central column, syncing with off-site shadows, activating dead relays hidden in satellites, cell towers, and abandoned mesh nets. A final message queued for global transmission: history belongs to the remembered. Etta turned to Marcus and smiled. You should go now. He looked back once, then sprinted toward the exit shaft. The corridors had begun reconfiguring themselves, sensing his departure. Panels slid into place behind him, narrowing the path, guiding him up. Emergency lights blinked in rhythm with the countdown. He reached the upper level and entered the lift. As it rose, he looked down through the grate at the flickering lights below, the last glimpse of a woman surrounded by the memories no one else dared keep. Outside, the surface hatch opened into blinding sunlight. Marcus collapsed onto the sand, breathing hard. The world above had no idea what was coming. Yet, he opened his hand. The crystal was warm. The card with the tattooed seal was damp with sweat. He stared at the rising sun and whispered the words she'd etched into history. Truth doesn't sleep. Behind him, far below, the vault lit up. Then fell silent. The first thing Marcus heard when he returned to the surface wasn't wind or birds or even the distant hum of city traffic. It was silence. Not the quiet of peace but the stillness before impact, like the breath the world takes right before it cracks. The desert sky stretched endlessly above, oblivious to the history rewriting itself beneath his feet. He lay there for a while, the hard metal hatch of the vault still warm behind him. Then, finally, he sat up and turned toward the small emergency transmitter embedded in his belt. It blinked green. The signal was live. He connected the data crystal and input the passphrase. The screen flickered once before showing one simple prompt: confirm dissemination. Marcus hesitated, fingers hovering over the button. Somewhere down in the sealed depths of the vault, Etta had either succeeded or she hadn't. The core protocol would now be cycling through its final authorization stage, a window during which the capsule could still be intercepted or overridden from high command, unless he pressed that button. If he did, the backups would launch. The satellite relays she'd hidden in defunct weather grids, the long-dead civilian meshnets, the dormant resistance channels, they would all light up. The Concord files would no longer be rumors. They would be history's reckoning. He pressed it. Back underground, the vault was quiet. Not dead, just listening. The countdown had passed 04 minutes ago. Etta stood in the core chamber, hands folded calmly behind her back, watching as the data spiral completed its final synchronization. The temperature was rising steadily now. A failsafe consequence of system override. The chamber wasn't designed to run this long at full capacity. It didn't matter. She wasn't there to walk back out. She was there to make sure it didn't stop. She closed her eyes and listened to the pulse of the system. It wasn't like a machine's hum. It was softer, subtler, like breath drawn through lungs made of memory and wire. She remembered designing it in silence, 25 years ago, before they buried it. Before they buried her. They never did understand the architecture of truth. You couldn't control it. You could only delay its awakening. A chime echoed once. System core verified dissemination. She smiled. Marcus had done it. Somewhere, the truth was rising like smoke through the cracks of the world. Across the city skylines, anomalies began popping up on public terminals. Old billboards flickered back to life, displaying once suppressed images. Protests that were never broadcast, arrests that were never logged, files stamped classified now rolling like headlines. In apartment blocks and neon-lit bars, people watched confused as familiar faces appeared alongside damning audio. Generals, CEOs, media anchors, even former presidents. Someone leaked the Concord files. In the control rooms of the corporate broadcast centers, alarms blared. System admins scrambled to halt the cascade, but it was no longer centralized. Every node that activated triggered another. The code was too old, too decentralized, and far too clever. Every attempt to kill a feed only activated 3 new mirrors. Within hours, it became apparent that the information wasn't just spreading. It had been waiting. Protests erupted by midnight in over a dozen cities. By dawn, security drones patrolling the capital were being turned away by their own command subroutines written by someone long forgotten, someone whose name no longer existed in the registry. Someone like Etta. The guards left inside Vault Chamber 9 had gone silent. Some had collapsed from exhaustion. Others just sat, backs to the walls, as the audio played on repeat. Footage of atrocities. Orders signed in cold ink. Interviews with people they thought were enemies. They didn't speak anymore. One of them, a woman with 3 combat bars, simply stared at her reflection in the vault's polished wall, repeating a name she hadn't heard in years, her own, before she enlisted. The corporate chain of command responded exactly as Etta had predicted. First, they denied the authenticity of the files. Then, they tried to blame the leak on a foreign sabotage unit. Then they issued a red flag for the capture of Marcus Vell. His photo appeared everywhere. Suspected terrorist. Dangerous traitor. Former junior technician. The irony of it wasn't lost on him as he read the notice from the corner of an abandoned gas station, where he'd hacked a solar panel to recharge his transmitter. He tossed the flyer aside and looked up toward the east, toward the city. The fires had started already. People weren't just marching, they were watching. Talking. Remembering. He pulled out the card Etta had given him. The inked seal was smudged at the edges now, but the message was still clear. Some doors don't stay closed forever. He made his way on foot to an old relay station buried beneath the hills. One of the shadow networks Etta had mentioned. He didn't know if anyone would answer. He just knew he had to try. Inside, it smelled of rust and ozone. A terminal flickered on when he approached. The words flashed slowly, node active. Request input. He took a breath. Marcus Vell, he said aloud. Transmitting validation sequence. Operator 9A confirmed. Concord files have been released. Repeat. Concord files have been released. There was a long pause. Then, another message. Welcome back, Librarian's witness. He stared at the words until they faded. He didn't feel brave. He didn't feel like a hero. Just tired. The weight of truth wasn't like the stories made it seem. It wasn't loud. It wasn't clean. It sat in your chest like a slow-burning fire and asked you not to look away. In the days that followed, more nodes lit up. Independent groups formed councils using unredacted history. Former whistleblowers returned from hiding. Civil orders collapsed in some regions. Others rebuilt from scratch. But across all of it, one image began to appear again and again, spray-painted on walls, scrawled into helmets, drawn on flags. The librarian's tattoo. The seal. They never found Etta's body. The chamber eventually overheated and melted its core supports. The structure collapsed inward, sealing itself in the deepest form of silence. The type only the dead and the honest truly understood. But the stories remained. Some said she escaped through a hidden passage. Others said she uploaded herself into the system and now whispered through broken radios to anyone willing to remember. Marcus never confirmed or denied either. When people asked what happened in Vault Chamber 9, he would only say, she didn't lock the door to keep them out. She locked it to let the truth out. And that was enough. You said. Years passed, but time never truly eroded what had been unleashed from the vault. The Concord files had long since outlived their origin, spreading through cultures like underground roots breaking stone. Cities rose and fell in the aftermath, some swallowing the truth in denial, others reshaping themselves entirely around what had been revealed. Entire generations grew up not reading the revised history taught by syndicate schools, but the raw, unfiltered records passed from hand to hand, from encrypted forums to back-alley libraries. The world didn't transform overnight, and not all of it changed for the better. But it remembered. Marcus lived quietly in the fringes for a long while, drifting between reclaimed zones and autonomous networks where people were building again. He never tried to reclaim credit or demand recognition. He worked as a systems analyst, then as a mentor for small community hubs, teaching teenagers how to decode truth from propaganda. He watched from a distance as statues fell, as false martyrs were stripped of titles, and as old faces disappeared from broadcasts. And though governments rebranded themselves and new flags were hoisted in every capital, none of it ever really reached the core of what had changed. It wasn't in laws or headlines. It was in people. They looked over their shoulders differently. They questioned more. They memorized less and remembered more. One day, as Marcus walked through a coastal city that had once been a military checkpoint, he came across a mural that stopped him in his tracks. It was spray-painted on a long crumbling wall, the paint sun-faded but still bold. It showed a woman standing in front of a spiraled server chamber, arms crossed calmly, and behind her, the symbol of the seal glowing above her head like a forgotten halo. Below her, in looping script, someone had written, "The librarian wasn't a keeper of books, she was a gatekeeper of memory." A child was drawing stars around the image with chalk. When he noticed Marcus watching, he smiled and said, "She's the one who told the truth when no one else would, right?" Marcus only nodded. He couldn't speak through the sudden lump in his throat. He left a sealed chip drive in a small plastic box beside the wall, an old habit. Not for attention, not for reward. Just for record-keeping. He had done this in dozens of cities over the years. Dropped fragments, anecdotes, corrections to public lies that still lingered like shadows. Not everyone knew what to do with them, but someone always found them. Someone always remembered. In the upper reaches of what used to be the Central Republic Zone, a private archive had recently been restored. It wasn't flashy. No cameras or fanfare. Just a squat dome hidden behind a ridgeline, disguised to resemble a geological survey station. Inside it, rows of analog terminals hummed quietly, operated by a rotating crew of volunteers, scholars, and former engineers who had once served the very powers they now archived against. At the heart of the building stood a small exhibit, one not listed on any schematic, not acknowledged in any budget. It was built from salvaged steel and tempered glass and housed the original master capsule Etta had carried. No one knew how it had been recovered. Some said scavengers found it in the rubble of Vault Chamber 9, others claimed it had never actually been in the vault when the meltdown occurred. The case holding it was sealed, never opened, with only a single phrase etched across its base. Sealed by 9A. Below that, a brass plate was bolted to the foundation with 4 words, "Not forgotten, not erased." Every few weeks, someone would leave something beside it. A folded letter, a data stick, a worn patch from an old uniform, a child's drawing. It had become a shrine, not of grief but of defiance. No one dared call it a museum. Museums belonged to the winners of history. This belonged to those who survived it. One afternoon, a woman arrived at the archive alone. She wore a plain jacket, a soft scarf, and gloves despite the warmth outside. Her hair was streaked with silver, eyes sharp and quiet. She signed into the visitor log as Anya Devik, a name no one recognized, and spent hours moving slowly through the archive. She read everything. Not just the Concord files but the testimonies, the witness logs, the records left by those whose lives had been shattered, or rebuilt, by what had emerged from the vault. The volunteers watched her from a respectful distance. They'd seen people cry, seen people shout, but this woman did neither. She simply moved as if she were mapping something in her mind, piecing together echoes that others couldn't hear. At the end of the day, she stood before the master capsule. She looked at it for a long time, then slowly removed her glove. Her wrist bore a tattoo. Faded, but unmistakable. 3 interlocked rings surrounding a single eye. No one said a word. She didn't touch the capsule. Instead, she leaned forward slightly and whispered, just loud enough for those nearby to hear. It was never about being remembered. It was about remembering them. Then she turned and walked away. After she left, no one changed the records. No one wrote an article or made an announcement. The visitor log stayed as it was. But those who had seen her began to pass the story quietly through their circles. Some said the librarian had survived. Others said it was just someone honoring her memory. The truth didn't matter. What mattered was the feeling that came with it. That history wasn't over. That someone, somewhere, still stood at the gate, watching. On the 10-year anniversary of the Concorde release, the world paused. Not officially, there were no sanctioned ceremonies or speeches, but cities lit up with floating seals projected onto buildings. Children painted them in schoolyards. Music played through pirate signals with lyrics quoting vault entries. All across the globe, for just one day, people remembered what had once been buried and what it had taken to unearth it. And in a quiet library rebuilt on the outskirts of a new community, where books lined the walls again and the air smelled of ink and wood and dust, a young student asked their teacher, "Why does everyone respect the librarian so much?" The teacher, a man with a missing finger and a gaze like weathered steel, replied, "Because she didn't fight to win. She fought so we'd remember who we are." The student thought for a long time, then asked, "Do you think she's still out there?" The teacher smiled. "I think she's in here," he said, tapping the side of his head. "And in here," he added, pressing his chest. "And that's the one place they'll never erase again." Outside, the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the world in shades of memory. And the seal, the one they mocked all those years ago, stood carved into stone above the library's door. Not a warning, not a secret, but a promise.